On the 28th. Getting close. Remember, it ends around here, so. Commonwealth won the initiative again. And this, as always in the game so far, has been sort of the well, there was a while when it was down here, but this, as recently, was the determining front on the choice. Do I want the French to have another turn where they maybe suffer an attrition loss and try to fight their way out? Or do I want to grab a double turn, maybe try to eliminate this? From what I can see, my situation is not going to be terribly different one way or the other. The French are perhaps going to take some losses here from attrition, unless I can do some kind of overrun. And then they're going to face, which I could, then they're going to make an attack which may or may not end up hurting them. If I don't, if I went first, my attack here might hurt me. I'm not sure. You know, they're sitting in a little town that's close terrain. It's not going to be a good attack. It wasn't last time. It's not this time. So, you know, I might get lucky. My barrages might work or something. But I think I'm going to leave it up to the French to try to dig their way out of this. It might cost me something. It might be worse overall for me, but it's hard to tell. And that's one of the things I've been thinking with this game. You know, there's no way I can give a review of one of the OCS games. Not easily. Because I love the system, there's no question there, but the system is so deep that simply there could be something that I'm just missing. You know, some way out of this that's better, some little trick that I could pull that would eventually become, you know, book for me, as it were, if I learn it, and probably is for many, many experienced players. But in my situation, yeah, all I got is what I kind of read in some of the strategy guides in the operational matters thing that came with Sicily, which really just shows me how unprepared I am to ever play this. It really is a game where there's enough little weird things that are so different from any other game, and not unreasonable things, but just weird things that, like, you know, when you spend a lifetime studying war games of the more traditional style, and then this, which looks like it, but it doesn't play like it, not at all. And it's very hard to translate the experience over in terms of all the nuance that you can get into this sucker. French breakthrough was not successful. It got wiped out, but it did force the Brits to retreat. It was a hard call because it's, you know, whether to take the attrition loss or which for those units wasn't very good. It was better than 50-50 that I'd lose a step that way. So I was on the 3 action rating and a fair chance that I'd just be destroyed. So not something I wanted to have happen. Or to you know, just try to bash my way out with an overrun, which is what I did. I didn't get quite lucky enough. I could have. But now I'm set up for another attempt at trying to solidify a position along this river line. And I've got a unit in reserve back here that I can use to fill in the gap here if need be, or for other purposes if I don't take the hex. I'm hoping to take that hex, though. I'll be throwing bombers, etc. Everywhere else, still that static position. As long as the Brits aren't trying to advance, I don't have to worry too much. You know, if I don't know if I have them buffaloed, or it does seem like our forces are too close in size here and here for anything to happen with such small forces. Over here, if anything, the French actually outnumber the English, but there's the possibility of, you know, going in at a flank or something and getting some kind of advantage. But that could end up as a tangled mess. Might end up not gaining much and just costing supply. So, we'll let them make their choice if they want to try something. Like everything was going great for the French. They disordered these guys. Their British artillery failed to disorder them. Ended up getting surprised with a 4-column shift, which sent us from over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to about here. But then we rolled crappy. And crappy enough that we didn't get the hex. We killed, as much as we lost. The Allies do not want to give up that hex. That's their way across the river. Now they can use it to leverage this, but of course there's a reserve unit in play, and this, that, and the other. That reserve would have probably been useful. It might have made the difference between getting the hex and not. On the other hand, this would have been weakly defended. If I didn't have the unit in reserve, I wasn't going to get an exploit that would allow me to shift units down anyway. And now we're back to the Commonwealth side. On the other hand, we've drained a lot of their supply, but this stuff is still accessible, I think, as far as here. Well, if I can get it to here, I'm okay. The problem is I can't get it here, which means these guys are out of supply, essentially. They can get trace supply, so they're not going to starve, but they're having a real hard time being effective in the fight. And obviously, if I've got to cross the river, that makes life not as easy for us. And we used all the French planes on that attack too, so we're not going to have the air power being able to help us. And France is out of artillery here. Now I've made artillery, by playing with the option where artillery can fire defensively without a reserve marker, it means they can fire twice per turn. You need a lot of supply for that, but it makes artillery, if supplied, very, very powerful because you can use it in the attack and in the defense. Is that reasonable or is it not? Again, I don't know. I would like to see people make the argument, to tell you the truth, because it seems like a pretty damn extreme difference as to whether or not you can disorganize an attack after having supported your own attack with the artillery. Most games of World War II that I've seen allow the artillery to fire both on offense and defense, but I don't have enough of an understanding of the artillery, the role of the artillery during World War II to really be able to judge, were they able to channel that much ammo through it? Should you have to maybe half fire on the one side, on one part of the turn, and half fire on the other part of the turn if that's the case? I'm not sure. It doesn't strike me as reasonable. It seems to me that the heavier rate of fire makes sense, or that a continuous rate of fire makes sense, both during the attack and the counterattack. But what I'm not as certain of is if the effect in the game is intended to kind of already have accounted for that. Like if you attack with artillery, well, you've busted up their formation. They won't be disorganized anymore, though. They have a chance to recover at the beginning. Well, okay, if you fire it on offense, they don't have a chance to recover. If you fire it on defense first, which is what the Brits did here, the French had a chance to recover, so none of their units would be disorganized now anyhow. So I could stop their attack with the defensive artillery barrage, or blunt it, and then come back and use my own offensive artillery barrage. And again, I'm just not sure that that's already baked into the combat charts in such a way that I'm making the artillery too potent. Some time ago I had a similar thinking process, and where I really came down hard on the system with the Vive l'Empereur series, because essentially, I think it was with that, essentially one of the options, was it that? remember if it was that or Won by the Sword. It might have been Won by the Sword. But where one option was just so significant. Oh no, it was Won by the Sword, but it was the difference between. So here's the thing. This is an optional rule. And Won by the Viva la Emperor has optional rules, which might significantly affect the historical accuracy of what you're actually playing out. But no, it wasn't Won by the Sword. It was Habit of Victory, the OGS game. OSG. Totally dyslexic today or something. Totally stumbling. So anyway, it had different rules for the small scenarios as compared to the grand campaign that presented a very different sort of play. So if you were to play the grand campaign with the small scenario rules, you would get a different flow to the game in a significant way. And it felt unbelievable to me in the sense that, look, you know, one of these gives you the accurate impression. And likewise with the artillery here. So if the game is actually balanced so that the artillery fire is meant to be one shot, either your turn or your opponent's turn, depending on, you know, the flow of, it's not within a certain game turn, but the flow of the play swaps back and forth. So if one person has initiative, their choice of reserve markers at that moment, you know, if they went first, affects the next segment or the next player turn within the same game turn, but it could actually bridge over a game turn. But it's just that you have this general total effect that the artillery can have, and it seems like doubling that effect, potentially, assuming you have the ammo available, which is the big question in this game always, but doubling that effect is a pretty significant difference, you know? So one's right at most, to me. You can't, and this is the argument I made with the Napoleonic game, is that, look, you know, one of these answers is at most correct, and if the game's not modeling reality correctly, it can't be modeling it correctly for both of them. You know, either the artillery has this effect or it has that effect. The problem is, of course, both cases you're looking at a model and it's an approximation, and maybe what you're looking at is a situation where, yeah, it falls kind of in the middle. Neither one's correct. And that's possible. That seems more clearly possible here than what I remember in the other game, where it affected movement rates and supply, obtaining supply and stuff like that. I don't remember precisely what it was, but there were things that were significantly different because of whether or not you used cards in the game. And you didn't use cards in this battle scenarios, but you were supposed to use them in the grand campaign. And they had a very significant difference on, you know, what you had available to you. It would be as if this, you know, said, okay, you know, if you're playing the shorter scenario, you get this supply, but not even, because it's not like it was stockpiles that you couldn't use or something like that. It's not like it was a definite reduction. It was just very, very different, and I don't recall precisely what it was. But with the artillery, at least it's both sides. It's just basically a general admission that the model may not be exact, it may not be precisely, you know, congruent with reality. And if both sides are getting better artillery, well, that'll favor the guy with more ammunition. But yeah, I'd really have to look very, very heavily, and I don't even know the how of going about it. Basically, in order to do it, you'd have to dissect the entire game and understand what everything is going on in it. And just as I have the feeling that, you know, I'm not qualified to objectively review a game like this because I can't look deeply enough into it. I actually question whether or not anyone, even the designer, can really grasp all the intricacies of the system well enough to be able to say, yeah, definitively, this one is closer to the reality, and that's why I designed it that way. And that's kind of a funny feeling to be in. It's kind of a, okay. But I can tell you one thing. It feels wrong to me to have the artillery prevented from firing defensively, just because I didn't set it up in reserve. I'm not saying there's not some effort to setting up a fire zone. I'm saying that that's sort of standard procedure, and that the defensive fire area would be something that is just present. Some of the problem from that, wow, I'm really going off the rails of just doing a playthrough here, but some of the problem with that is that the abstraction of this game is a little different from some other games, which is to say, by separating the barrage out and making it its own segment, you're no longer saying, okay, that barrage is part of the combat and it's influencing the combat in the same way that it does in Desert Fox or in many, many other conventional games. Desert Fox a little less conventional, but still seems to follow that, hey, I'm throwing artillery in, it's got a particular value in that game in terms of column shifts that it provides to the attack. Okay. But here, because I've segmented it out, it's no longer associated with the combat. So I can do an artillery strike not necessarily fitting what seems to be those fire zones, right? And that's kind of weird because my only defensive recourse for this artillery, the only way it helps in defense, is if I give it that reaction marker under the base rules. Or if I'm playing with the option, it has that defensive recourse by firing before the attack's actually declared. And that's not what's actually happening in general with artillery strikes on a defensive situation. Neither one really is. It's not a matter of trying to interdict the enemy's position prior to launching the attack. That may be happening, but the kind of defensive fire that I'm talking about is something that happens as the attack is occurring. And there's no way for that to really develop in this game. The closest you come to that is, it looks like he's going to attack me here. I had better knock out his unit. And again, every game has its abstractions. This one, I think I'm just going to have to swallow, whatever objections I have to it. Make a decision one way or another. It's easier if I don't play the reserve markers, to my mind, simply because I do really feel like defensive artillery has a significant effect in World War II. And if you don't place the reserve markers, you don't get defensive artillery fire. And a couple of my errors have been pointed out. One of them is one I just engaged in, actually. With this unit in reserve here, I couldn't have put it in reserve. And I did that earlier as well. You can't put something in reserve if it's in a zone of control. I think putting this in reserve was a mistake anyway in some ways. I could have moved it right up here and it could have fought the battle. I could have moved right up here. And would it have fought in it? I believe so. This hex was available to me. Anyway, I'm going to leave it as it is and try to remember that rule. The other has to do with trace supply. Back when the French were escaping from here, I traced supply using foot movement points. That's not legal, apparently. I just looked that sucker up after being informed of this, and yeah, it's definitely, you can only use truck supply for trace. The only time you don't use truck supply, apparently, is when a headquarters unit is throwing supplies that the headquarters itself has a foot movement allowance. So it's a little weird, and I think I played through all of Burma incorrectly then as well, because I think I was doing trace supply with the foot units where they could, using foot movement, but I'm not positive about that. That was so long ago. But that seems like something that I remember doing back then as well. So yeah, you know, one of the advantages of playing this on video is people who know the system can come back and say, yeah, you got this wrong. And that's great. You know, it may not show everything accurately, which makes it less valuable as a video to many people, but on the other hand, it also ends up giving me an advantage, at least, in terms of getting things right. And, you know, there are plenty of people out there who are more versed in the system putting out the videos. So if you don't want mistakes, I'm not the person to look to. It looks to me like the Brits got their first time that they've gotten the maximum supply. They've been kind of not getting great numbers on their supply, I think. And obviously not very good numbers here, but that is a tougher chart, I guess. I don't feel like I've been averaging that 2.5, but anyway. That gives us enough that we can sort of refill the supply here. I don't know if we can launch an attack here, and here's the problem. This is too weak now. I've stripped too much away from here to try to bust through here. I've put all my eggs in this basket, basically. Can I launch an attack over here? Maybe. I have... see, what I'd want to do is I'd want to knock out this reserve marker, because the top unit there... Oh, look, it's a motorized thing. It could actually make it here, and maybe some others could. With this, looks like fair quality stuff. If I'm not pushing forward on here, I feel like I damn well better make some ground somewhere else, and at least make the French make some hard decisions as to where their supply is going, stuff like that. And I should be able to do that. I also got a replacement unit because we've been fighting some battles, so it's a decent cav unit. 4 quality, a lot of strength points. Coming into the meat grinder. Over here, maybe I want to make an overrun. Coming across the river, I only have 6 strength points if I do that, though. And I got no way of improving on it, except that I got a fair chance of making a surprise, right? Because I got a +1 on the overrun modifier. I still need an 8. In order to get in there. And I don't know how likely that is. On the other hand, if I go in with everything, well, I don't know that that's going to be terribly useful either. Plus, I got to knock that plane out if I'm going to go in that direction, which may not be a hard thing to do. I've got this plane, I can shift it over and then fly it over there to hit that. Also might want to build an airbase. This isn't the turn when I can do it, but I can set up, shift my headquarters forward. It stands right now. 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. I'm barely in supply with these guys. I probably need to get that headquarters forward. On the other hand, there's this one, which... geez. There's just so many different options and pathways even now, but I feel pretty handcuffed into not being able to do what I really want in terms of pushing forward here, and that kind of sucks. Of course, I've been cheating for the French, so inadvertently. Oh, of course, the Brits are going to try to do everything. I move up into place to attack here. Successfully air units disordered that stack. Had a moment of nightmare of Oh geez, have I been playing that all wrong? Do you get to keep your reserve marker and just have your movement half? Because the disadvantages in sort of a player's notes type section don't mention that you remove the reserve marker. Well, looking at the rules, yeah, that's how it is. And that's what I remembered from elsewhere, but I had that momentary uncertainty because my whole plan has been disorganize the reserves. It's because they're both mode markers and it's switching mode, and you remove all other mode markers when you disorganize. So I've managed to use the boats to knock this out as well, and that's made it so the French really don't have a lot of reactive capability. I'm going to try to attack across the river. I'll be using my artillery there. I've got ammo up here I can use for that, so that should work, and I've got ammo here that I can use to try to disorganize this unit. But the French actually have an option. They could just run away. And running away one hex is actually sufficient. Since my goal isn't really to do a stand-up, drag-out battle, I might have an advantage from it, but why don't I just leave? I'm still in good terrain here. Why not to try to attack units in reserve? Because they can just leave. Now, if I was playing with the attack and additional hex here, I would get to advance at least. But I don't see that as too big a deal. And I'd still have to pay for the attack to do that. And that's why you probably wouldn't do that advance the additional hex very often. You'd use it in places like trying to get around this river line, etc., like I would have. And because of that restriction, I think that I may start playing with that on the next OCS game I touch. Because I am a little disturbed by the fact that, hey, you lose some movement, etc. And, you know, if you're willing... First of all, if the bombardment does clear things and you were launching an attack, for the same reasons I was talking about the defensive bombardment, if the bombardment clears things and you're launching an attack, you should be allowed to continue that attack if you want, if you're willing to pay for it. Secondly, hey, you know, if you push, if you use a little bit more resources, etc., it makes sense to get another hex. I know Dean wasn't thrilled with this rule, but used it to placate people who felt that there were a few little flaws in the system. And that's the same thing with the artillery. The big question is, as with the artillery, does it fundamentally change the game in a way that damages it? Was it so carefully crafted and balanced? And honestly, I don't think it was. It's a really cool system, but I think the careful crafting goes into trying to make it reflect reality. And that even if there are places like the artillery where it's effectively doubled in potential effect, I don't know that, you know, that strongly affects the balance of any particular scenario terribly much. Nor even the balance between the arms because of the huge supply cost for that one. But anyway, now it's time to spend my supplies to try to crack this nut at least. Because I'm not getting the attack that and I spent all my air units on this and everything, and it was just pointless, you know. We took an option to do this, but we got an exploit, and that means we can just keep rolling. There's other disorganized forces we can keep slamming into, and, well, I see no reason not to. We have a fairly decent size force here now. What I'm not sure about is whether we can do an overrun, because we don't have 3 movement points for this. We have 1.5, and an overrun, I don't think you can do an overrun with the, oh yeah, I can move a hex, but I can do the base combat there, and since there's nothing, you know, able to intervene or anything, I see no reason why not to. For the French, do they have, all their reserves have been put back in the bank one way or another. These guys just push themselves back. That's why. So yeah, we're free. We're free to do that. I don't think our reserves particularly help us, though. Not what we were planning on, but we ended up using up, and I'm wondering, I think these actually, I should have some low ammos over there and less supply or something, but I'm not gonna think about it. I forgot because of the disorganized marker that there are low ammo units that had to be replenished if they could. We ended up using up all our supplies, but because we got the exploit, you know, it seemed like too good a thing. Got some good terrain here. And the French position is definitely weakened by that. There's no longer anywhere along the coast that's clear, or that's not clear. It's all clear terrain going up, which means armor, such not, which we have some here, can be more effective. And that's causing them more problems. Let's cheat a little for the Brits this time. I did throw this thing in, paid the fuel to drive it up, and now I'm basically out of supply in these two locations, or wherever, here and here, that I had been building. Well, here had been for a long time, and I had a decent amount there, and now it's pretty low. Now the thing is, the French don't know it's low. They don't know that they'd be attacking and probably able to attrition down the British units. So that's where the playing solo kind of hurts, is that unknown, you know, values. The stacks, not so much. I can forget how strong a stack is and kind of make a good guesstimate. But knowing the supply level that the enemy has that's not exposed, that's something that is actually very, very important, and it's just a blind spot for me. I don't know how much of the supply came from there. I don't know how weak that's been made. And if I didn't know, which I probably shouldn't, although that would be an option, how much replacement supplies, or how many supplies they've been getting off the chart, I might well think the Brits have more supply than they actually do, because I think they've been kind of getting shafted. I can look here, though, and see that they've burned everything on the route going down. Like I said, this wasn't really my plan. My plan had been to build an air base here, get the river line, and force my way forward. But sometimes you get carried away. A good attack, I'll throw more in. Well, may not always be the best move. I keep turning these because I don't know why. Anyway, that looks like it's the end of the 28th, and we make it into the 29th, and we'll see. I want to flip and turn everything, don't I? I guess we'll see whether or not the French can put together a defense on that line. It's a tough call time. French won initiative. Do they need to go first is the question. They have disordered units here and here. These guys aren't going to get attacked. All their reserves have been used up. But the Brits look like they're pretty low on supply. We don't know what's still left there. We think there may be a couple points there. A couple points could launch the attack, plus they're probably going to get some more. Oh, there's obviously some there. All right, I think we got to take the initiative, or the first play, just in order to get rid of those disorders. And plus we can kind of fall back and position ourselves a little differently. One reason we haven't, though, is there's motorized stuff in there, and I don't want to burn the supply unless I have to, but I feel like maybe I have to give some ground at this point. Supply roll, I didn't do much at all. I stayed in the same position, just different units are in reserve now for whatever value they might serve there. And then over here I pulled back a little down the line. Some of my intention here, one, I don't want to be attacked without the Allies having to spend fuel to move. That's just a bad idea, and I can give up a hex at this point. Although there aren't that many left, but at this point it seems like a wise move. But also, I have this intention of building a hedgehog, and that would serve some good purpose for me, which is that this is the route that it's going down to. The question is, should the hedgehog be built in Beirut? And just say, all right, I'll give up ground, I'll fight as much as I can, and eventually have to do a fight there. Where there's, is that a major city? I think that's still a minor city. Haifa's major. But at least I'd have the very close, I'd have the ×1/2 multipliers for armored units there. I'd have a lot of reasons to think maybe I could hold out there against prolonged attacks. Or do I build the hedgehog somewhere in the way and hope that it's enough to delay, and then that Beirut is the next big stumbling block? And that's a tough call. Right now, falling back, I think my intention is to build it here. But the danger with there is that it could conceivably be circumvented, kind of like we saw the line circumvented elsewhere. But honestly, I think it has to be, because if the Brits lay siege to Beirut, well, then they have the road to Rayak here. And, either one's an auto victory. Therefore, I just can't, I'd have to get some other defensive line up here, and this would be facing this same main line of attack, as opposed to here, where the Brits kind of have stalled because they just don't have the troops for it. Now, they don't have the supply for it even, but anyway, that's what happened. The Allied turn is spent basically rectifying the problem they had with the out-of-supply units up here. They're still dead in terms of supply. I'm using my transport to try to filter it up at a reasonable speed. I don't think it's worth me getting an air base up here. See, the advantage of an air base is the French can't slam their planes into me easily. The thing is, it's a full supply. And it's really hard for me to get a full supply up here. There's no rails going up. The main rail line through the country runs up this way, so, well, through Syria. There's nothing in Lebanon, basically. And until we get up in the north. I don't know that I'm going to be able to make it, on the delaying action. On the other hand, here, as long as the French keep putting a couple of reserves up there, there's not much I can do to them. I can't really get my fingers into them. They'll slip away like they did before. I can drive them off of this good hilly terrain, but how worth it is that, If they can just keep falling back a hex or two as long as they're in reserve mode, it just doesn't seem worth risking planes on an attack against the units to try to knock out the reserve markers. Obviously, if I split my planes, I might be able to get both units, because the problem is, if I get one unit and attack it, and it's pinned because I bombed it, the other unit can then reserve it. If I knock out the unit that's reserved so that it can't come in and try to attack the other one slips away. And I just chose to keep my planes off board. So, Mr. Bickford suggested I might want to look into the rail busting actions. I just don't see where they're going to help me at this point. First of all, there's nowhere where the French seem to be trying to move supplies anymore. They've been pumping their supplies into here and not really worrying anywhere else. Now, Obviously, if I could get them to engage and start draining their supplies, then it becomes a more valuable thing. But I have to take the flak roll, you know. What, 1 in 12 chance of the flak actually taking a step down, but that would be painful if it happened. And then 2, my planes aren't available as a defensive measure. I can fly them right now and drop some bombs on the French during a reaction turn, and prevent them from attacking me with some good air support. So, not that I really think the French are going to attack anywhere at this point. I've got all my artillery up there for that reason. Yeah, except the artillery has no supplies, so it's totally worthless. But yeah, I'm really facing a time crunch in terms of trying to get around here. And since I haven't succeeded on any of the other avenues, I put all my eggs in that one basket, and that basket looks like it's filled with, I don't know, grackles or something. We pushed through the June 30th turn. The French were forced to go first by the Brits. Not a lot that they're doing, just collecting up supplies. The Brits ended up taking down another step of French planes. They're almost done. They only have one more actual fighter left, I think. These transports can't really do anything defensive, so they might as well stay where they are. I did try out one of my bombers. Try to hit this. If I got it disorganized there, I would send 2 more bombers after this. It didn't work. So, let's put some units in reserve, I guess. I kind of forgot to do that, but it doesn't really matter. Might as well put these guys in reserve instead. That thing's not going anywhere. Supplies driving upward. The French built their Hedgehog. Optional rule, but I'm playing with that along with several others from the specifics. And that's really about it. The Brits have enough resources, and it's entering into a build turn, so I can build an air base here. But I'm having such a slow time moving supplies up that just further delays my ability to attack. The thing is, I don't want my attack broken up by the French air power. I need to get something in the way. If I get a fighter up there, I can start shooting it down. In which case, maybe the French don't commit their air power. I doubt that, but anyhow. Okay. So the French won the initiative die roll, and they're forcing the Commonwealth to go first. Commonwealth got kind of crappy supplies, but they should be able to build their air base at this point. I think that's an important step towards trying to launch this attack. We'll see. As long as these French reserves are here, I don't see a good way of doing much more than pushing them back a heck. So we'll probably still be storing up our points until the French are forced to play more reserves maybe somewhere else. But I don't know if that's ever going to happen. There just aren't enough pieces. If I could divert some forces here, I could launch an attack in that direction. But as it is, I feel like decisions I made earlier have forced me into, hey, these were going to be the 2 axes of attacks, and this one's been denied me. Of course, I don't spend the supply if I charge forward and they run away, but I noticed something here that disturbs the crap out of me. There's a little joke, this section here. So it's the different levels of victory and what you have to do. Now, first off, this shouldn't be on the back page, whether it's a joke or not. You know, what the effects of the level of victory are really usually kind of, hey, it's worth looking at the beginning, of this scenario, if you want to understand what the strategic implications of the attack would be here. Well, instead of putting that in, which is a useful thing, but apparently the designer didn't think that was useful, They kind of make fun of it, which is okay. Marginal, the loser must offer the winner a firm handshake and sincere congratulations. This almost sounds like an Avalon Hill type thing. The next, except for that it's funny, the next one is the loser must offer the winner a firm handshake and sincere congratulations. Yeah, same one. The loser must also buy the winner an adult beverage. The winner chooses obtains massive bragging rights. The loser, I mean, look, if you're not going to give the historical, that's fine to make this little joke. If there's nothing you can say that's of any importance, about this campaign, or if you just don't think that making those projections is realistic and you think this is funny, that's fine. Put it in the scenario side of things. Don't put it on this back page. This is really, really valuable. And you know what I need? I don't even really need this all that much, although that's helpful if I'm counting victory points. I need to know how many points each of these damn towns is. Replace this chart with the list of the towns and their points and the hexes, which is actually vital. Now that actually, that's the same for both scenarios. So, it's just because I'm constantly looking and saying, okay, what do I need to defend? Rather than, this chart is absolutely useless unless I know what the towns are in the points. So you could get rid of both of these if you're not going to put the other one in. But I think if you are playing this competitively, having the list of those towns, or if you're trying to assume that the victory conditions have some historical meaning, which I don't think they really do. I think all they have is an expression of how well you're doing. Personally, I prefer, something that gives you an idea of what it would mean for the future campaign. But I can understand where making that kind of hypothetical judgment is just a little goofy. Commonwealth builds their forward air base. They really have a supply problem up here, though, so we're trying to ship more and more resources into place, but we only have 1.5 in range, and that's not really sufficient to bust through this line, in my opinion, by any means. So it's not like I couldn't put more here. It's just I don't have enough truck to bring it up. Largely, I think because I'm back one of these trucks. I don't remember quite how I lost it, but it's gone. And then over here, I hope I wasn't cheating for the French on that again. The Commonwealth, again, moved forward, tried bombing, failed to get either of the reserves. They only tried one and failed. And then the other one slipped away rather than giving the Allies an attack. Yeah, there's tons of ground that I can give up. So that's not really an issue, and I'd rather not give them a shot at making a good attack. I did give them a chance at making this attack if they wanted to. Actually, I better not. Let me fall back to there, because that would still be in range of the artillery, and that would be a bad idea. And if I'm falling back there, I probably want to move these guys back too. Just because I'm giving up more hexes this way, but otherwise I really wasn't helping myself too much. Getting down to the dregs of the game, as it were. We're getting very close to the end. But the French got the initiative, forced the Brits to go first. The Brits launched a naval fire here, and that's all they did. And no advance here. I just feel like I'm not getting anything with that. I don't know if there's if there was a decent supply route here so that I could get trace supply, I might try to swing some of my force up here to try to cut this and gain a lot of ground. There aren't many victory points there, though. There may be one or something, but there's not enough to win the game. And I'm really kind of committed here. So I launched a naval attack here. It did not work. Then I launched an air attack there, and I guess that actually happened during my exploitation, which means I should really have these reserve markers on the board. I wanted one here. I don't know if I need this one. I kind of need them up here instead. Does this help me? See, I'm worried these guys could get hit. I don't know how big a deal it would be if they are, but there's not really a lot I can do to protect them. My stuff's all too slow. I knocked out the final French fighter, but with 2 failed bombardments against here to knock out the reserve, I can't take a chance of attacking this, so I'm not going to waste the ammo on it. I've pulled more ammo forward for whatever that's worth, but you know, it's kind of running out unless I can break this and get a real breakthrough, which might mean hitting the hedgehog itself. And I don't have the troops. I really don't have the troops. And there's not a whole hell of a lot of time from when those come in. Now, you know, if they're foot moving, they're not going to make it. But if they motorize and run their way up, they might be able to, you know, be there for a final push. But I think I've got to break this before that. Side of the turn is, of course, almost non-existent. I did decide, hey, you know, the Brits might sneak up here and attack my headquarters, so I threw a cav under that, just to give it a little bit more sturdiness. You know, it's kind of funny, as the attacker, I seldom notice things like that, but when I'm looking at as the defender, sometimes I'm like, oh shit, that's bad. That means that mistakes usually don't get capitalized on when I'm playing solo. Just a matter of perspective, but honestly, if I was playing it opposed, as the attacker, I might not be noticing either, so yeah, I'm kind of dense. I also found this infantry, which got kind of lost up here in the hills, and we're sending that around to try to stiffen the line over here, but that's really about it. I think it's close to over, to tell you the truth. I just don't think the Brits are going to be able to push through here, and I don't see where else they can do it, given what I've done so far in the game. This is the only place where I have enough troops to be able to play around. Maybe I should go for some attritional battles and see if I can wear down the French supply. But the thing is, the French are building up some dumps in the background here that they could throw into play. So it's not like if this line, you know, gets taxed heavily and these supplies get eaten up, just because the Brits have more on the line there, that the Vichy French are in any kind of particular trouble. They have good fallback positions way back, you know, looking in this area here, where Damascus still doesn't look likely to fall, although I probably would have to throw some troops in there, or else, you know, some kind of outflanking type maneuver might work to try to grab Damascus. The problem is, of course, you have to be able to be in trace supply, and if you don't have the roads, there's not all that much of it. Look at this shit. Oh, that's a wadi. I don't know what the effects are, but it's got to be less than a river. Okay, so here we are on the 5th of July. French won initiative again, forcing the British to go first. I got a big supply roll, 3.5. Only the second time in the game that's happened. And I realized something I could have done last turn probably isn't worth it this turn, which is bombing the airbase. The reason it's not worth it this turn is last turn the French fighter was over here. But I forget, because these guys are off map in this little box, that they're actually here. And I could have done a bombing raid on them. it would be neat to take away the French fighters that way, but now they're kind of handcuffed because I have, or the bombers, because I have my fighter over here protecting stuff. But I wouldn't have needed to build that air base and everything if I could have knocked out the French fighters and hit the bomber. And there was quite a bit of time where I wasn't really thinking, again, because of that stupid box, although it's useful, but because of the stupid me interacting with that box, there were quite a few times when I could have just launched an airstrike against that. Now, it's got slightly heavier flak capabilities than everything else we've been facing. Headquarters do too. And actually it's got a +3 to the flak, which is fairly significant. Because remember, I'm aiming at an 11 or more. That means on an 8 or more, I would be taking some possible hits. I think it's just one hit. One step from flak. But anyway, I didn't do it. And at this point, it seems kind of risky to go in there and bomb the bombers. Especially since I need my bombers every turn to basically try to crack this. The Commonwealth gets their big result against this hex. I took a loss, which means the defenders have to take their option. They have two options. They took a loss on their lead unit. That's great. But now they have two options. And if I take both of them, well, where do I retreat to? I'll be back here, and that's not very good if I take both of them as retreats. So I think I still have to take yet another loss, and I've got a real kind of numerical problem showing up here, where if I'm here, and we've got these exploiting units, I'm not sure it might be possible for me to even take that big stack down. Again, that's kind of tough because the hedgehog effects are painful. I'd kind of like to go around it, but that may be beyond my capabilities. I've got some armor here, but it probably gets partially neutralized. In fact, it certainly does. The hedgehog provides it with a high armor capability. So, but the thing is, though, if they do go to here, some of these exploiting units, and they're all actually qualified too, even though it's an E4, everything's 4 quality. These guys could go here, the armor could slide forward, and I could try to take this hex then, and that might be the best move that I can make. Turns out I shouldn't have continued the attack. Oops, I can't retreat there. I ended up with a kind of... The reason the first attack succeeded so well is I ended up with surprise. Well, it was still fairly likely here, but not tremendously so. I need an 8 or more because I only had a 2-point advantage, which is what I had before. And it didn't come. It came close, but it didn't come. And then we both got an option. I could take a loss to try to get this hex, or to get that hex. That hex wasn't worth enough to me, so I fell back. And now, the French reposition their forces. I do have some reinforcements coming in, so they may be able to rebuild that line to some extent. But, yeah. Maybe I should have launched the attack on these guys. I don't know. I just really didn't want to hit them. It's so ugly. So, now we go to the French turn, and they try to rebuild their position there. What's going on down here? Why this isn't moving? The Allies have enough supplies to handle an operation there. They don't have enough firepower. Their artillery would be sufficient to support it if they could throw their air power in here. Basically, they have to make a choice between an attack here and an attack here, as far as I'm concerned. Again, maybe if they could get some attritional combat, but what we've learned so far is that the French have too much capacity to pull back or reinforce whatever's being attacked. So it just doesn't seem worth expending too much brain power to try to push them back a few hexes when it's not going to matter in terms of the game. To be fair, there would probably be a delaying battle continuing down this way. I just don't feel the need to be playing it out. I don't think it's going to get me anywhere in terms of the victory conditions, which is why I'm almost entirely focusing here. Commonwealth won the initiative. Vichy French essentially said, you know what, there's nothing we really want to do. They moved their infantry that's been hobbling about. But for the most part, a little bit of supply movement, but otherwise they're standing pat. Now, and I understand some OCS players, you see counter set up kind of like this amongst their stuff. This game really causes you to want to show multiple steps of things happening in a hex, so you end up with less of that kind of OCD, everything facing in the same direction and everything, and more of this. And I know some people call some of the OCS players out on, oh, why are your counters not facing all the same way and everything? Yeah, well, it's because you want to express the information so that you can see it easily. That's just one take on this, because you can't stack the counters cleanly and see everything you need, which isn't terribly bad, except if you have OCD. So, from the British point of view, I was starting to think, geez, you know, is there something I've just been doing wrong? Because with my supply advantage, shouldn't I be able to do something here? Other than the attrition attack, which I've been having a hard time actually getting my claws in for, so I haven't really been trying it. What I'm considering now, I may not do it, but I may just to see how it works, is a run up using part of my movement in reserve, throw myself into reserve, and then remember you get like a quarter movement that way, and then try to run back. I don't think my units are mobile enough and strong enough to do both. Basically, to be able to try to cut the headquarters. Headquarters are actually pretty valuable items, so as targets, they might be better than some of the other traditional supply source type ideas, like, hey, let's cut the rail line. Cutting the rail line doesn't do a hell of a lot. The enemy can always fall back and destroy you, or send a detachment back to destroy you. But cutting the headquarters might be of value. I just don't think I have the kind of maneuverability in this game to do that. But it is kind of interesting because the way the sequence of play is structured, you get to get that quarter movement before you face your supply phase, then you're in supply, and then you do later during the exploit phase a move to run yourself as far back. So now you've gotten 1.25 times your movement, and you didn't have to suffer the supply loss from moving out of, or the effects of being out of supply. Of course, you do have to use one of your reserve counters to do this, and you know, the guys who are furthest along the way, they are motorized infantry. They might just be able to do this. The problem with motorized infantry, of course, is I won't be able to ride this road up, but I can come here 1, 2, 3, 4, and then shoot my way across. And it might be my best answer. It would be a whole hell of a lot easier, though, if I had like a truck with some supplies to send with them, which I don't, or like an organic supply truck or something like that. Because if I do launch this attack, I'll be doing it with my internal reserves. And that ain't gonna last long. Ahead with that, pushed my headquarters up to here for the Brits, and this is as far as I could go. Multiple different possibilities for supply. Actually, no. I can make it to here, because I can trace supply to this rail because it goes off this way. I was thinking, oh, I gotta trace to, you know, what I control here, but no, this is all mine. You don't actually have to walk over rails to control them, so don't worry about the fact that I never moved over here. Now, over here, you can see both my bombardments, the naval and air, have been successful. And that means maybe I can get a good attack going there, and I won't have to use lots of supply for the artillery. Here I was, holding on to artillery fire and using the planes over here to try to neutralize one thing. Well, I'm going to try to take this shot here. Question is, what do the French do about it? They lost one of their reserve markers over here, but the ones over here are still available. Is there something I can do? Not sure. I don't think I have a whole hell of a lot of movement capability here. And I may have a tough time reacting to what it looks like is going to happen. As I'm playing with the optional artillery, being able to fire during reaction phase, I actually did have a very effective reaction. He disordered these guys and disordered these guys. Knocking the reserve marker off these guys. They were too close to some guns, I hope. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. Just wanted to make sure and I believe we're in supply. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the headquarters was able to defend itself, and you can kind of see where, trying to do something clever like that, it didn't work. But that would have been an interesting situation had the Brits, had we not been playing with that option. Although actually, right now, these guys are under a reserve, so they would have been able to fire no matter what. This over here, not so much. I think it means I try to launch a shot and try to get around the in the hills again. And I think the heart of the British offensive has been destroyed there. That attack went with a very unlikely defender surprise. That was with a -2 on the surprise table, and you needed a 5 or less. I'm sorry, a +2, which means I must have rolled a 3 because I know I didn't roll snake eyes. And big roll over here, which then with the attack, 7 + 2 went up to 9. An attacker lose one option one. Well, I could lose both units, and then I wouldn't get the hex, but kill a French unit to a defender option 1. Well, instead I took the option, and that means the defender didn't lose anything. And I think the Allied chances of any kind of advance have just been stymied completely. In fact, we're probably going to see the French being able to demolish this brigade here. They're brigades, not regiments. English. That's going to really prevent any kind of thoughts of any kind of weird play down here being able to gain me anything. Alternatively, I could turn and smash into here, but I really need to protect this and my supply source, so I will need to fall back there. The Brits are in supply, though. The road goes back there. Over here, I just don't see... if the Brits get a double turn here, they might be able to do something. In fact, if they get a double turn, they might be able to do something, period. And the initiative choose to go first. You can see they swarmed in on this unit. Moved some supply forward. They're already pretty low from the additional artillery bombardment and the infantry hitting, the cost for the infantry. The surprise roll went just as bad for the French. I haven't rolled their attack yet. They're on the 7-to-1 column in the open because of the armor. They've got a lot of strength points there, but they've got 5 shifts against them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which puts them down to 1-to-1. They've got +1 for quality. The British troops are as good as theirs, and that puts us to an 8. Attacker lose 1, defender option 1. The defender's obviously going to just take a retreat. These guys are not in combat supplies, so they picked up some low ammo markers, which that's going to eat up some of my supplies, but I've got tons of it back here. So the French, by attacking, may have actually done something that the British have been wanting to have happen, which is, and these guys moved forward, the reserve, which is to start an attrition fight because the French can't win that. Their supplies are too limited. Flow of Commonwealth reinforcements has come up. We're preparing for an attack next turn, getting supplies stocked into place at this point. But over here, this unit's pulled back. Now, over here, and I finally got some extra people. Couldn't quite make it. Didn't want to spend the railing on them because I need the rail for the supply, because I'd like to launch an attack somewhere over here. And the question is what to attack. Do I attack some infantry, or do I go after this artillery here? Artillery's been such a pain in the butt to me, but the French are running low on supplies. Artillery is not very useful if you don't have supplies for it. I don't know. I really don't know. One nice thing, I've got air cover here. If the French want to throw their planes in, I can just shoot them up. Of course, the French goal is, hey, my planes will be useful if I fall back out just a little outside. Actually, the hex that this was in was 9 hexes from the air base. So, if we can give up just a little bit more ground, we're okay. But how to get a grip on what's here, what to attack, these are the tough things. I don't think hitting the infantry is terribly useful to me. On the other hand, I don't think anything's terribly useful. The artillery is a resource I'd like to knock out. So I think that's what I'm going to go for. The Brits had no intention of attacking here. The French bombarded them, disorganizing, preventing a little medicine there. For the English, these guys had to recuperate their ammo, which between that and the attacks actually depleted the holdings that I had up front here. I pulled my artillery back where it's safe with some reserves. These guys launched their attack on the artillery. They wouldn't be able to destroy both. They got a defender lose one with a couple options, which could have forced a withdrawal and a disorganized. But they got an option and an exploit. They chose not to take the option hit, which would have been, on their quality unit here. They had no intention of advancing. They had nothing they really thought they could attack easily in the exploit phase. I used my planes to bombard the artillery just to disorganize it. I was hoping to kill them both. It was pretty good odds, 11-1, no surprise, but pretty crappy roll for the combat table itself. And I think that is putting us into the next turn. 2 more turns. That's it. I ain't gonna make it, but not anywhere. So I'm holding something like 2 or 3 points at this point, maybe a little bit more because I got up to here. I think some of these are worth a little bit, but I'm in the rich side of the Vichy points at this point. And I really don't see too much of a chance of that changing. I'm not going to make any movement here of any value. I'm just not set up for it. Here, the value is too far back for me to get an effect. Maybe if I had started breaking things apart with that lunge earlier, we'd be a lot further up at this point. And then here, this is just too solid. If it just collapsed, yeah, Beirut's open after it, but it's not going to just collapse. Even if I push them back a couple hexes and then another couple hexes, there's still not enough time to take Beirut. And there's no, remember, I have to be in trace supply, which means I have to have the road clear as well as be there. Both forces the French to go first. And they pull in close ranks here. Sure, there's ways to try to cut across, hit that headquarters. There's something under it. I can look because I don't have a combat troop. Oh, look, it's actually a troop. So, running out to smack that doesn't necessarily do me much because the internal stocks are enough that whatever's back there will get wiped out. Sure, it'll force the French back quite a bit. But at what cost? And then shifting supplies, getting them into into range of that headquarters and into fallback locations, so that, if the French are forced to fall back, they've got plenty of places they could get their supplies from. And over here, nothing's changing, obviously. English naval fire failed, air fire failed. I don't see much hope there, and we're almost done. Over here, I'm freezing because there's just no chance of gaining victory points. But the biggie is I can't devote my air power to help out over here. So facing a couple of reserves like that, there's just no way to paralyze the French enough that it could make a move against them. Now over here, because we're so late in the game, I think I'm going to make a try. And the nice thing is, I get to wait until after the reaction phase. Of course, the French are going to use their artillery. By the way, the English lost a step of planes actually on the bombing run to flak. But the French, if they can get through this turn, there's basically no way the Brits are going to blow through. So I think I'm going to commit my air power, let the Brits use their fighter to kill what they can, and I'll also, of course, be committing artillery fire. I've got to decide what to commit where. And the air, if it makes it in for the bombardment, will prevent us from doing a different bombardment with the artillery. Now that's kind of the problem. I'd like to disorganize both stacks, but this one's bigger. And do I want to use the heavier air power against that and use the artillery? That's almost impossible to do anything into the hills. I don't know. But conceivably, if I can knock this out, maybe I can pull a reserve there. So sending the air against the hills doesn't seem that bad an idea. Problem is the reaction bombardment had to be done before movement. So I wasn't going to get to move those reserves after I see what the effect is, which makes sense. If you're being attacked and you're using defensive bombardment, you can't be that flexible. You have to be predicting how well the bombardment's going to go. The first bomber actually got hit and knocked into the inactive box. However, it also took down the British plane. Neither one lost a step. No, they both lost a step. And so the rest of the bombers were able to succeed in their mission, and they actually managed to disorder it, and likewise the artillery succeeded as well. I don't see a British attack there. And that's basically the end. There's one more turn, but the Brits are just not going to be gaining any ground. They're not going to make any attacks. Why waste the supplies on a crap attack? But I mean, trying to make an attack disordered against something that I wasn't sure I could take, I didn't feel like I could take in good shape. It's just not going to work well. Notably there, it's the age-old question, of I've got victory conditions. I could win the game if I bust through here. So I should make that attack because I've got almost no chance of making it through next turn. Well, if that's the case, and if victory is the only thing I'm interested in out of a game, yeah, that's what I would do. However, in this situation, I'm looking at, I don't want to wipe out the Commonwealth's forces at some chance at an unlikely victory, when conceivably I'm probably going to win the campaign no matter what. There's no magical thing that's pressing down on me and saying, yeah, I got to win by this point, or I got to do this well by this point, or anything like that outside of the game. Just to say that the game's victory conditions don't really match the reality on the scene. No commander would feel that particular pressure in these circumstances. I can think of no reason to consider that there's that kind of pressure in play here. Of you can't, you've got to make a certain level by the 12th, and if you don't do that, well, okay, so you get canned. You still wouldn't sacrifice all your troops, unless you were truly a psychotic person. And that's the problem with games, is quite often the victory conditions don't match the realities in a reasonable manner, which is to say, here there's a binary victory condition, or at least a situation where, hey, if you breach Beirut by this certain date, you win, and if you don't, you don't. And there's no consideration of what losses you've taken or anything else like that. The only consideration for victory is what terrain you've taken, which doesn't really conform with, what the commander's actually facing. They're not told, if you don't make it there by the 12th, you might as well lose your whole army, because it just doesn't fucking matter, No. On this very last turn, the French get the initiative. They force the Commonwealth to go first. Over here, I just kind of tighten up my position. I just can't figure out a way to do anything that's terribly valuable back there. And this is the problem that I foresee, is that forces that are approximately equal can't really get a good grip on one another. And trying to fight under those circumstances, you really either need a big reserve to take advantage of anything that you cause in terms of effects, or you need a big mobile force to do the first strike, and just something that's big enough to actually plow through stuff. There's not that kind of armor in this game. Or your enemy has to leave a hole for you, and it's very hard for me to see those holes when I'm the one creating them. I've seen a couple of opportunities, but they're hard to take advantage of. Like where the French artillery was able to jump in and stop an outflank that could have run up and done some damage back here. That it's like, well, maybe it's just not all that worth trying to do. Especially since my limited plane supply, I'm going to need to try to break the main front. And that's been the problem all throughout this scenario is, hey, I got 3 fronts to allocate resources to. I got enough supplies for a couple of fronts to work, obviously not for all 3, because, well, I probably have enough at this point for all 3 fronts to be kind of stocked up. But over here, I'm beginning to get to the point where if I was sustaining an offensive, it would be tough, because even with the rail line, that only allows me to move 1 supply point. Not 1 token, but 1 whole supply point. And then over here, I haven't been able to maintain an offensive because I've been having trouble getting the supply up to the front. And that's often the case in the OCS stuff, is that, wow, I can't get, I have plenty of supplies somewhere, but they're not where I need them. The French have less supplies overall, but because the British are limited by their capability to bring the supplies up. Now, if I had that other truck that I was supposed to start with, and again, damn if I know what happened to it, I certainly would have been able to maintain this offensive better, or I might have been able to do a secondary here, although the forces aren't really there. Anyway, without the boats here, I really need to hit 2 things. I need to hit both of these. One with the airstrike, one with the artillery. Don't know which to do which way. I actually have enough artillery and supplies that I might get a second shot if I fail with the airstrike. I had a reserve unit that I put back here after the last video, and the one way of getting an attack, disorder this, the planes did that, maybe disorder this, I don't know, get a hit here, and then try to run, maybe get an exploit, which will get clear maybe this hex, and then send the reserves through, which is one anti-tank, well, anti-air. Actually, I don't know what the hell that is. Doesn't look like anti-air, but I don't remember what the symbol. That may be actually anti-tank. Anyway, and they do provide anti-tank capabilities. Up to here, and launch an attack on what is just the headquarters, which I might have a shot of taking, and that would win the game. You know, I still may go through with that. Although my main force was disordered, it can still attack. It won't be able to get the exploit, but these guys could. And as long as we have somebody in this hex, we can actually trace through. So there's still some opportunity here. It's not a very good one, but my artillery can now fire with its concentration on there. The problem was, again, the defensive French artillery. Now, obviously, I had a French reserve over here. I had these guys who probably aren't going to have a play in terms of victory points in the game. If I needed that firepower without the optional rule, it would have been there. You know, that defensive artillery is too valuable in a situation where you're just trying to delay the enemy. You're not going to wipe out a lot of his troops with an artillery barrage, but you might convince him it's not time. It's not the turn to attack. So this was indeed disordered, and now an attack from everything. And yeah, I had a lot of supply. I still have 3 full supply points left, which is probably enough to fuel whatever's going through. The problem is, I got surprised. The Hedgehog guaranteed a surprise, even though I have 1 level higher quality. The Hedgehog counteracts that. We end up on the 5, and it's easier to be surprised, I guess, as the attacker than as the defender in general, and that's cool because ambushes or whatever. But here they were surprised by some of the defensive setup, and that ends up being a 5-column shift. Now I was 3-1 in the open before. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That puts me almost to the bottom of the list. And we'd be a +1 normally for quality, but again, we're at 0 on the die roll, just like with surprise. We get a 9. It's not going to do it, whatever it is. Attacker loses 1, option 1, defender option 1. That's the game right there. I can fiddle around and figure out what I want to do. But I didn't dislodge them here. I didn't gain anything here. I'll count up the points, come back with a bit of a wrap. But there were certainly a few things that hindered the Commonwealth. Probably the biggest one is it's harder to attack than to defend. It's harder to see the way around, you know, a situation in a lot of cases. And as a newer player, I have a tougher time on the offensive. I put up a defense and I say that looks good enough, and my attacker looks at it and says that looks pretty good. I'm going to bludgeon my way through. If I was playing against somebody who was competent at the game, they probably would have found some ways to get around and by my troops and to degrade my position that didn't involve just flinging the forces against it, as was happening here. Batter, batter, batter. Now, if I was a better defender and expecting, you know, and understood where I could, where I was more vulnerable, and moved some forces off of there, then the bludgeoning attack would have been more successful. Add to that a couple more things. I cheated a couple of times for the French, you know, inadvertently, but I made a few mistakes that I think favored the French. And one of them may have been, somebody pointed out they don't think that I rolled Commonwealth supply on the first turn. I'm not sure if I did or not. I may have caught it later and given them additional supplies. I'm really not sure. I certainly didn't know anymore by the time the question was asked. Another is, oh crap, there was something else. Shit me. Oh, so another factor is I think the Commonwealth, especially in the early part of the game, got crappy supply rolls. And they definitely got crappy replacement rolls. They got 2 people through the course of the game. That seems, there's a fair number of turns here. Not as bad as it might have seemed, but again, early on, they just got nothing. They were pretty lucky with their boats, though, I'd say, in terms of getting rolls there. So, you know, overall, this was not a complete blowout, right? I mean, the French didn't stop the English dead. Even on this last turn, there was some possibility of Beirut falling. To prevent that, hey, I could have thrown a French unit back here, right? And then the Brits would have had a much, much harder time, even if they breached this line. That's the kind of, well, the line would be weaker, but I couldn't lose an automatic. I think I was very worried about the French chasing down towards Amen. At least with my inexperience, I think they actually had a positive effect by being there, by being this far south, because there's some victory points up here. Anyway, I'll count those points and come back. I think we're going to be looking at either a crushing or overwhelming, somewhere in that range. My guess would be crushing, but it's hard to tell. But crushing in what terms? You know, I mean, what does a Vichy victory mean here? It means more resources, more time has to be spent on this campaign. In the long run, they're not going to hold out here. They're, you know, facing really odds that they cannot stand up to because they have no replacements coming in, whereas the Brits would continue to be funneling forces into here. But a success here and those delays and whatever could actually cause the the Allies some grief elsewhere. And would it have a huge effect on the war? Of course not. It's one of the things I look at with these operational games, actually, is that you're almost always seeing a slice that I don't feel is at a very good it's not very discreet, right? So even if you, I guess it depends. When you're looking at something, but these really are strategic. When you're looking at something like the old Avalon Hill Stalingrad, which I consider operational because of the systems in play, and I don't have any, production or anything like that. But when I'm looking at something like that, I have enough to be able to say, I'm in command of the entire front over the entire war. And, well, that's strategic, really. But with these operational games, you have a slice of something that's going on. And in this case, this is a fairly discrete theater in the sense that, yes, I'm affected by what's going on in Egypt and in Greece and this, that, and the other, but I'm not directly connected to them. On the other hand, where it's a slice in time. I don't have the if I could play this out further, it would be a British victory no matter what. It's just a question of how long it takes them to reach a certain victory condition. In this game, the decision is you have a bounded amount of time, but you have to reach a certain level of victory within that time. Other games might choose to say, okay, you have a certain level of victory you have to reach, and however long it takes you to do it is what determines your victory conditions. I'd actually prefer the latter because there are certain operational goals in place. And in this game, if it defined what those goals are, if that is the ultimate goal of this operation, or the point at which Vichy France would throw the towel in, then, well, that's fair, But why make it this binary yes, no? Give me however long it takes, because the key then is how long does it take me to get to my victory? To me, the fact that I got to the victory in, about a month is a very different thing from if I get an automatic victory on turn 4, you know, right? To me, that's a serious difference in what the effect this theater would have elsewhere, is really how long it takes you to do it and how many resources you commit to it. And so I would just prefer something that reflected that better than this does. But, you know, what the hell? It's not like this gives a real a bad view of that. It's just there are certain choices that I would prefer in terms of putting you in the proper mindset. Because here's what happens. This is where I complained about the victory conditions. The Brits could have gone, you know, all out, and they sort of did, right? You know, I was prepared. I made this attack. This is an attack I would not have made if not for the fact that, yeah, one more turn to get my automatic victory possibility. Let's push just a little bit harder. Well, if instead, you know, if this was the situation that I was looking at was an attack of the similar nature, which would have hurt my chances more significantly. And if I have a certain victory condition to make, and it's time bounded, and it's not directly time bounded, but it's time, you know, time is the discriminating factor between levels of victory. Well, I'm not going to waste my possibility of getting here within the next month by throwing everything in to try to scrape a marginal victory out. At least those kind of victory conditions give me some kind of view into, hey, this is why, you know, I can at least take on, I can be trying to achieve the victory conditions as best as I can, not worrying about a binary win-loss situation, which, you know, even this game doesn't provide for that, but it just doesn't give you the right reflection, in my opinion, of where the commander would be thinking. Yes, you'll still have players who say, yeah, well, a marginal victory is a victory, haha. And, you know, so what, I took a strategic defeat. I could have had a marginal victory. Right? You'll still have people who look at things that way, and whatever, you know. That's their choice. But this game does not, this game's victory conditions actually encourage that kind of play. Because you're looking at the, all right, I can get here, I can win the game, or I can waste my forces, which don't even affect my victory standing. You know, I don't even fall down into a, you're doing worse. Let's actually calculate the points. I should have done this before all that ranting, but Dunmore 1309. That's going to be a yes. That's 2 points. Eintrez, 1312. I didn't quite make it there. There's no reason I couldn't have, but I don't get the point for that. Sedan, I have that. That's worth a point. That's 3. Merdayun, 2212. I think that, no. Yeah, that's back here. So that's a point. Hasbaya, 2115. That's this hex here. The French still hold that. Rashai, 1818. And no, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing these well. No way. Almansa 1220, probably not. That sounds pretty far up. Yafuf 624, definitely not. Dimox 1524, anything in the 24s I'm not going to be at. Dimox is somewhere back here. Here. Headquarters is. And then the 2 Damascuses. So I netted a total of 4 victory points, which is indeed the crushing Vichy victory. Another factor, you know, I'm in pretty much the same position, but I've made it to here, and I'm kind of blocked. Still a crushing Vichy victory? Is that eligible? You know, I mean, if the fall of Beirut is really that important that it would end the game, being a couple hexes from it should maybe not, you know, change it to a Commonwealth victory, but you should be able to take into account what is likely to happen. So whatever the conditions are that would cause the fall of the Vichy territory, that should be what you're judged against, how well you made it to that. And if I didn't get Beirut, but I'm close to it, well, a binary choice between, hey, do you have Beirut or not, is not sufficient to put it in the context of how expensive is this campaign going to be. The proper, you know, in my view, the right way to do it is to say, okay, well, how long did it take you to get to those conditions where the Vichy would throw the towel in, where it would be so obvious that you need not send more resources in and you can start drawing down your forces. Again, you know, all this probably belongs more in the review, and I'll, if I remember, point towards this or repeat myself or something. Let's send this up and we'll get to the review soon.